And if you think about it, that pattern of warfare is exactly what was commonplace, say, in the highlands of New Guinea or in Amazonia, even within the space of my own lifetime. War is a common behavior in that form to both chimpanzees and humans. So why wouldn't it be something that we inherited from our common ancestor? Now, war. What's it good for? If you win your tiny little Parola-Pacific war for just a tiny bit more territory, well, you'll gain all of the resources in that territory. And that means your troops going to be a little bit better fed because it'll have the trees and the plants and the tasty, tasty grubs. And you'll have a stronger immune system when you get sick. And so will your children. And so your children will live longer and you'll raise more children. And as you acquire more resources, more of your children will be born through the generations. And of course, that makes your troop even stronger and even better able to fight your little wars. So that if you're good at war, natural selection will shine upon you. Well, what makes you good at war? That's the real question here. Well, what they think now, what they understand from chimpanzees and human beings, is that you're good at war if your little troop, that is your mates, can function effectively as a unit. You have to be able to coordinate your activities to attack territory. Now, we know for a fact that language skills do not go back 10 million years. So they're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way with grunts and looks, and with the ability to get into the head of your mates. That's the key skill, because the better you can get into your mates' heads, the better you can think as a group. And the better you can do that, the better you can do at war. And the better you can do at war, the more children you have. And so, the ability to get into each other's heads, that skill gets reinforced by natural selection. And over time, that becomes evolution. And so, as the generations pass, you get better and better at knowing what your mates are thinking. And that's the beginning, way back there, of the social revolution. All the way back there. Before we looked anything like human, we grasped the heart of the matter. We have to know each other well to survive. If we want to succeed, we have to be able to get into each other's heads. Now, there are limits to this knowing, particularly when you have a relatively small brain, like Parola-Pacific, because knowing someone actually takes up a lot of brain capacity, and it fills up. And when that happens, that means you can't know everyone around you intimately. And when that happens, then your troop starts to get increasingly argumentative, confrontational, and eventually it breaks into two independent troops. It's all because of a communication breakdown. But of course, there's strength in numbers. If I can manage a troop of 22, and you can only manage a troop of 18, I'll probably defeat you in a war. So there's pressure year after year after year to grow the troop, to quite literally stick more people in the space between your ears. Now, for a long time, that won't lead anywhere. And then there's a baby born with just a tiny genetic difference, which allows them just a tiny bit more brain capacity, so they can handle another person or two between their ears. But that makes a big difference. Such a big difference that that baby's genes get passed along very rapidly, and soon everyone's holding another person or two between their ears. But of course, that capacity comes with a price, because these Parola-Pacifians have slightly bigger heads, bigger brains. They need to eat more to keep these brains well fed. And well, those big heads are going to soon prove really problematic. And this is where we cross over from our first story into our second story, because this is where we leave the world of men behind and we enter the world of women who have been there all along, giving birth and gathering food and raising children and mourning the dead, just as they always have, just as they still do today, as they have done for 10 million years. But somewhere, someplace in the last few million years, something changed for women. Something perfectly natural became utterly dangerous, and it happened because of our drive to socialize. Human birth is a singular thing in the animal world. among the primates, so that's all of the monkeys, the orangutans, the gorillas, the baboons, everyone. Of all the primates, human babies are the only ones that are born downward and facing away from the mother. They're also the only ones who seriously threaten their mothers as they come down the birth canal. And that's because our heads are big, they are very big, they are freakishly big. So much so that one of the recent evolutionary adaptations in Homo sapiens is a pelvic gap in women, so that as women are getting closer to delivering birth, their hips literally break apart to create a larger birth canal at the expense of their ability to walk. Women walk much less efficiently than men because they give birth to such large-brained children. Now, there's two notable side effects to this big brainness. The first is very well known. Women used to die all of the time in childbirth until the first decade of the 20th century. 1 in every 100 pregnancies ended in the death of the mother. And on average, a woman would have around 10 children over the course of her lifetime, which meant that every woman stood a 1 in 10 chance of dying in her lifetime from childbirth. That's an extraordinarily high rate. Now we have survivable C-sections and all sorts of other medical interventions, and that number's fallen to, say, 1 in 10,000. But nowhere else among the mammals, nowhere else in the animal kingdom do you find this kind of danger associated with the delivery of offspring. That's the real high price we pay for being big-brained. We very nearly kill our mothers. Now, the second side effect, it's less well known, but it's so pervasive we simply accept it as part of reality. Humans need other humans to assist in childbirth, right? That's not true for any other species on planet Earth. There are only 2 documented examples of cultures that encourage, they actually don't do it, they encourage women to try to deliver by themselves. Now, until the 20th century, when you got the medicalization of pregnancy and childbirth, pregnancy and childbirth was women's work, right? There was this thriving culture of midwives who did the hard work of delivery. But for at least the last few 100,000 years, and probably a great deal before that, the act of childbirth has been an intensely social act. Women come together to help their sisters and cousins and daughters pass through the dangers and into motherhood. If you can't rally your sisters together when you need them, childbirth becomes much more lonely and much more dangerous. So this is what it means to be human. We entered the world because of the social capabilities of our mothers. So women who had strong social capabilities, who could bring their sisters to their aid, have an easier time in childbirth and are more likely to live through it, as would their children. And after the child's been born, mothers need help from their peers, particularly in the first few hours when the mother is weak. Women have to provide food and defense and shelter. And as the child grows, that mother is periodically going to need help with childcare, particularly if she's just delivered another child. So mothers who can use their social capabilities to deliver these resources when they need them, those mothers will thrive and those children will thrive. And so those capabilities will tend to get passed down generation after generation. Just as men had their social skills honed by hundreds of thousands of years of warfare, women have had their social skills sharpened by generations upon generations of childbirth. And I know all of this sounds very not politically correct. But our liberation from biologically determined sex roles is very recent. Men raise children, women go to war. But behind this lies hundreds of thousands of generations of ancestors who did these things along gender-specific lines. And that's left a mark. Men tend to favor coordination in groups. That might be war, it might be a footy match. Women tend to concentrate on building and maintaining closely linked webs of social connections. Women have a far greater sensitivity to these social connections than men do, but men work together as a team to slaughter the opponent, whether that's on the battlefield or on the pitch. Now, the prefrontal cortex, right here, it's freakishly large in human beings when compared to chimpanzees. That seems to be where the magic happens. It seems to be where we keep our mates. Socialization has its limits because our brains can't grow effectively bigger. They already nearly kill our mothers. Our brains already consume 25% of all the food we eat, and they don't even stop growing until 5 years after we're born. That leaves us defenseless. It leaves us helpless far longer than any other mammal. That's another price we pay for being so social. But we're maxed out. We've reached the point of diminishing returns. If our heads get any bigger, there won't be any mothers left to raise us. So here we are. An estimate conducted by an anthropologist 20 years ago set the number of people who could fit into your head at about 148. It's not very many, but for countless thousands of years, that was as large as any tribe or village ever grew. That was the upper boundary of the number of people that you could know well. It set the limit on human sociability. And then about 10,000 years ago, this comfortable, steady state of human culture, human development, it blew apart because two things happened simultaneously. One was that we learned how to plant crops, which created larger food supplies, which meant families could raise more children. And then we also began to live together in communities much larger than the tribe or the village.